Welcome to We Need to Talk Now, presented by AT&T. I'm Alicia Jay, and I'm here with Ashley Nicole Moss. And we have a very, very special guest. Please welcome cyclist Kate Courtney to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Great to meet you guys.
Great to meet you too. Now listen, as somebody admittedly who has hardly ridden a bike in my lifetime, I'm not even gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie. I do like it when I have though. I was just absolutely fascinated with your story as I was reading it and just getting ready for this interview. And like your first cross-country mountain biking world championship came back in 2018 at the age of 23 years old. And then this year, you won your second world title at the UCI Mountain Bike Marathon World Championships. Like, I mean, you just keep raising the bar in your sport for sure. But how do you feel like you've grown since the first time, the first world title versus the second one?
That's a very good question. And I would say in many ways, there were 7 years that separated those two titles. And during that time, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of challenges. And I would say some moments in which I moved away from maybe my strengths as an athlete, what brought out the best in me on the race course. And then I would say in this latest chapter, an ability to really understand and utilize those strengths and to put myself in a position where I could leverage what makes me unique as a rider, what I love about the sport, and bring all those things together in a really great performance at the Marathon World Championships.
Well, I know you talked about those ups and downs, and I know while I was reading, you said this is one of the hardest and most unexpected races of my career. Can you just talk a little bit about those ups and downs and specifically how they propelled you in this hardest race that you had?
Yeah, I think first I maybe will give a little bit of background on how I ended up racing it in the first place. I typically focus on cross-country mountain biking. So that's the Olympic distance. It's a bit shorter. Our races are about an hour and a half in length and involve usually 5 to 7 laps of kind of a 3 to 5 kilometer course. So it's kind of like the track racing of mountain biking. And that was really my focus this year. I was focused on those World Cup events and on that shorter distance. And in May, I actually broke my wrist. And that is kind of the worst time that you can break your wrist in the middle of our season. And I was going to miss 3 World Cups. I missed national championships and was out for a good period of time during the summer, having wrist surgery and starting this prolonged recovery period. And during that period, we actually have a big summer break in our calendar. And so I was going to be back right during the summer break. And my physical therapist suggested, he's also my strength coach, Matt Smith, suggested racing a very historic long distance race in the US called the Leadville 100 mountain bike. And it's this big challenge. It's kind of this mythical historic race in the US mountain biking community because it's a mass participation event. So it's something that amateurs target as like a big challenge of the year. And we race on the course at the same time. And so I ended up refocusing and being able to do that event. And that was very unexpected. I had a great ride there. It was a 7-hour event. It was the longest event I've ever done. And it set me up to then target the Marathon World Championships, which was on a very similar course, a lot of climbing at altitude just a few weeks later. So it was 2 events that I never planned to be at, but that really brought out the best in me as an athlete. And I would say really stoked that curiosity and that involvement and engagement with the process because they were so unique and so different. And I felt this freedom and almost lifting of pressure because it was outside of my normal expectation and outside of the events that I've typically targeted. And that brought something new to my riding that I think really freed me up and hopefully will also help me bring that mindset back to the shorter distance.
What was that refocus like, right? Because you have an injury, and for every sport, there's an injury that's kind of rated higher than the others, right? Because it's just such a huge part of your day-to-day, whether it's training, whether it's a particular race, whatever the case may be. So you break your wrist at the worst possible time, and then you kind of go into your off season through that. And it's just a lot of downtime for your mental, for your physical, for your spiritual, all the things that really play a huge factor into rehabbing an injury to getting your psyche back to compete. So what was that process like for you?
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head with the mental part of it. I think those injuries are super mental, and they take you outside your normal routine, your normal preparation, the expectations that you have as an athlete of what you'll be able to do to train and prepare and compete. So for me, I was lucky enough, I could ride an indoor trainer, which is a bit of a blessing and a curse because it meant that I could keep up with a lot of the physical training that I needed to do after, of course, I had a couple weeks after surgery. But training indoors in your garage for long periods of time is not necessarily what lights your soul on fire. And I think in those moments, it was actually a really clarifying period because a lot of the things that are joyful for me about riding my bike are being out, moving my body, going from point A to point B, spending time in nature, and also being able to prepare for these big events. And a lot of those things were kind of removed from the equation. And it forces you to really consider like what makes it worth doing these things that maybe I don't like to do as much. And for me, the answer to that question had previously been, I want to be on a World Cup podium. Like that's the goal of my career. I want to get back on a World Cup podium. I had this success early in my career in this discipline, and I have to do that. And I think while I was in the garage having these long sessions, suffering quite a bit, I came to this realization that actually what brought me to the sport in the first place and what really drives me in the sport is the ability to take yourself to the edge and to be able to find out that you're capable of a little bit more than you thought. Like that is why we go to compete. We compete because it provides this arena where the fans are there to push you. The competitors are there to push you. The course is designed to push you. And you're given the opportunity to go beyond yourself in those moments. And I could do that in the garage. I could find that edge. I could push it. I could go a little farther than I went last time, whether that was physically or even just mentally being able to push myself in an environment that catered to my weaknesses and that catered to the things that maybe I didn't enjoy as much about my sport. And when I then targeted these longer events, I had this clarity that they were an amazing opportunity, again, to like find that edge and push myself and see what I was capable of physically and mentally. And I found that to be very freeing. It was a real moment in which they always say like process over results. It sounds really great. And it's a cliche for a reason. But as a professional athlete who's in a results-driven business, that is one of the hardest things to maintain is that connection to these building blocks that get you to these results and to the types of performances that are worthy of those results. And I think for me, that injury and those moments of reckoning in the garage really brought me back to those kind of core pieces that make it worth trying regardless of the outcome.
A blessing and a curse in a way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of worthy results, you not only were in this race, you actually won. Okay. So you pivot, you do all of this, you come through these mental, really hard mental, I don't even want to say exercises, but literally you're doing all of this to get to this point that you can be in, and you win this race. You actually break a record in the race. Finish with a 6 hours, 48 minutes, and 55 seconds, right? You're not used to these long races. You have done all this training. You win this race. What were your thoughts when you went over that finish line after all of that?
Before you even answer, 6 hours on a bike just blows my mind. I'm somebody who loves to ride bikes. I grew up riding bikes around my neighborhood in New York all the time. And I used to push that bike to the limit. I'd ride around the neighborhood for hours on end, but it was like a couple blocks here, you get off, you talk, you chat, you get some ice cream, you get back on. Like 6 hours on a bike, I couldn't even fathom. Like my butt hurts thinking about it.
And I already said I just haven't been on them, so I couldn't even imagine 6 hours.
Yeah, I will say that's one of the cool things about cycling is I think in some ways, like maybe that distance and that particular event is not the most relatable challenge in the world, but the feeling of being on a bike is pretty relatable. Like most people have ridden a bike, whether it's to school, to work, to hang out with friends, recreationally. And what I take joy in and what I find on the bike is often very similar, right? It's that sense of freedom. It's pushing yourself. It's this vehicle for adventure and exploration and connection and all those things. So I do think this is a very extreme version of riding a bike, but it is a lot of those same feelings. And I think for me, like these ultra endurance events, I find to be, you know, equally mental and physical, because not only is it a long time to be riding and racing, it's also a long time to be focused mentally. And I think that's what makes them such a great personal challenge and such a great learning experience, is that you have to find all these little tricks to keep yourself in the moment. If you are 30 minutes into that race thinking, I have somewhere between 6.5 and 7 hours to go, that's a pretty tough thought. But if you can think, okay, in this section, this is what I'm focused on. I'm eating, I'm pedaling, I'm, you know, hitting a certain number on this climb. I want to be in this position and I'm getting to this aid station. And then at the aid station, I'm going to do this and switch into this mentality. You start to really construct both a kind of physical, a nutrition plan, but also that mental plan that can keep you really in the moment until that finish line. And I think, in both of those ultra endurance events that I've done, like those finish line moments are so powerful, because right until that last minute, you're really, really focused on the task at hand. And it almost like comes as this shock and surprise and elation when you actually do cross the finish line, because you have to be so committed to every single step that gets you there.
I like that you use the word endurance multiple times, because that leads me to my question, because this guy has an endurance like I've never seen. The fact that he continues to do his own stunts blows my mind. But you got to appear in a commercial, a promo with Tom Cruise to promote the 2028 Summer Olympics, excuse me. I'm a huge Mission Impossible fan, and I am kind of like a geek when it comes to the behind the scenes of making those movies. And for people who are unfamiliar, when Tom Cruise is jumping out of a plane, like he's actually jumping out of a plane, the fact that these one's Paramount, soon to be Skydance, if it hasn't gone through yet, don't quote me on that. They have to take out massive insurance policies on him because he refuses to use a stunt double. So how cool was that? Emma, correct me, you're officially a Skydance company. Yes, so how cool was that to like the biggest action hero, one of the biggest action heroes of our time? I mean, the Mission Impossible franchise is a gold mine. It's so entertaining. And you are in a video promoting the 2028 Summer Olympics with him.
That was a pretty surreal experience. Honestly, just fun. Like, I think sometimes as athletes, we lose sight of these kind of dream moments coming true, and these just really unique, cool opportunities that you never could have predicted coming out of doing the thing that you really, really love. And so being asked to be in that piece, first of all, was a huge honor. I could not be more excited for a home Olympics and for the opportunity to be involved in some way in promoting it and in helping tell the history of our sport, which actually started in California in the 60s and 70s. So yeah, I think that was like a dream come true to begin with. And then when I found out who the A-list celebrity would be, it blew my mind quite a lot. But yeah, being on that shoot, I will say like my biggest takeaway and one of the things that has stuck with me from that experience is, you know, I was not sure what to expect from meeting Tom Cruise. That's a pretty crazy experience. And from the background of what his week looked like, right? He was shooting Mission Impossible. He had to take a huge international flight overnight. He jumped out of a plane at 3 a.m. I think he probably got a quick nap, and then he had to come shoot with me, right?
Right.
And he showed up to that set and was obviously the consummate professional, but had joy, like authentic joy in what he was doing. And I think for me, that was just such an instructive moment of oftentimes living your dreams involves a lot of challenge. Like that schedule, any of us would be exhausted trying to manage what he does on a daily basis.
Especially the jumping out the plane part.
Oh
That's
my
really
God.
awesome to me.
Not alone. That's a week for
You
me.
try
Right?
jumping on the plane?
That feels like a week to
Yeah,
like
that in itself is enough.
build up to, recover from. And that's just from 3 to 4 a.m. for him. But yeah, it really reminded me that what brings us to these passions is joy in doing the actual thing. And it was really cool to see someone who has obviously refined his craft for many, many years and still takes joy in even a very small, silly production that's not at the level of a Mission Impossible stunt, but that hopefully is meaningful and that hopefully impacts our sport and brings some attention and visibility to the women in sport that I think will be pretty exciting to watch in LA28.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. I saw the other day that there were going to be tickets on sale soon. And I was like, where do I need to camp out? Like, I need to get those tickets. But you mentioned joy. And I know you've had a lot of moments of joy in your career. We've talked about some of them already. But if you could pinpoint one moment that just was set apart from everything else, what would it be?
It's such a good question. And there's so many elements that go into those joyful moments. Can I pick two? Okay, we're picking two.
All the joy was all the joy.
I would say those 2 world titles were the biggest joyful moments, but maybe not just for the reasons that you'd assume. I think that first title was shock and awe, right? Like we all hope to have one of those moments in our careers where you kind of outperform expectations of others, but you also outperform your own expectations. You think, oh, this might someday possibly happen. And then the stars align and it happens. And my parents were standing at the finish line and I got to share that with a team and with a community that had worked really hard to make it possible. And then to use that moment and that momentum to really hopefully inspire the next generation and to really ride the wave of what I feel has been an incredible moment in women's mountain biking for Team USA. I would say the second world title felt very different in a way. In a way, you cannot repeat that moment where it feels impossible, right? Because once you've had that kind of breakthrough moment and you've reached the top in a sport, whether it's probable is to be determined, but possible, it is. You know it's possible. It's happened before. You've done it. You've seen that you're capable of competing on that level. And I think for me, this second world title, it was a 7-hour race. So much can happen. I actually did have a flat tire at the very end and thought pretty much for the last 20 minutes that I would lose the race and somehow was able to hold on to it. I again had my family there. So I shared that experience with the people that were most meaningful to me. But I think what differentiated that moment is that I knew I had done what was required to prepare to have a chance to win. But I also now in this phase of my career have a true appreciation for the things outside of my control that need to align in order to have these magical moments. And so it was this appreciation that these moments are earned. You work very, very hard with a group of people for a long period of time to be capable of competing at that level, but they're also given. There's this kind of like mystical quality of what has to align on a given day for you to cross the finish line first. And so I think maybe if I had to pick one of the two, this most recent race was really that appreciation of being proud that I put in a ride that was worthy of that result, but then also being grateful that everything aligned in a way that allowed that to happen.
Before, I know we have to let you go soon, but I have to ask you, I mean, this is a podcast where we celebrate women's sports across the board. And in so many women's sports, we have seen such a growth in so many different ways, whether it's a growth in attendance. You know, when you talk about the WNBA, it's the expansion teams and the new cities that are getting franchises. We're talking about the facilities that are being built to do better by all women athletes across the board in sports. What growth have you seen specifically in women's cycling, and what growth do you feel like there still needs to be in the sport? So kind of a two-parter there.
It's a really good question. I would say, first of all, cycling in many ways, mountain biking has many of the aspects required for equality. So we race on the same day, on the same course as the men. We have equal prize money, thanks to a lot of women before me who fought hard for that. And so there is a built-in kind of equality in the structure of our sport, which I think is pretty remarkable. However, it has not always translated to equality in terms of compensation, in terms of respect, in terms of the way that women are treated and talked about, and the opportunities that we have in the sport. And that has changed dramatically, even in the course of my career. I think in the US in particular, we've had a huge growth in just the number of women who participate in the sport. When I started racing, I was the only girl on my high school mountain bike team, and there just weren't that many women on the start line. And I think a lot of that comes down to being in a bit of a male-dominated sport in which women have not always found a community. They have not always seen themselves and the riders that they're watching on TV. And now that that's changing, I really do think we're having this groundswell of participation. And hopefully that continues to change the culture and continues to open up these opportunities for women to not just participate, but to really dominate in these sports.
Well, and specifically, when I think of, and I know I've been joking this whole time about how I've hardly been on a bike, but I don't remember seeing any women cyclists growing up. I know that for sure. And I know that, they say, see her, be her, right? And marketing is such a huge driver of everything that is happening in women's sports right now. How do you think marketing of your sport can change to make sure that, young women see that cyclist is an option, like something that they could do one day?
Which is interesting, because I feel like when I've taken cycle classes, right? Like I used to be a member of Soul Cycle, and now I take cycling classes at my gym. And obviously it's two different types of cycling, but you would think, at least all the classes that I've been into, it's been very rare to see men in those classes. So you would think there'd be some sort of translation to having a love affair for it as just an extracurricular exercise to maybe doing it on more of a professional basis. But to Alicia's point, I kind of feel like there's a stoppage between the two. And then when it becomes a professional sport, it's more men than there is when it's kind of extracurricular. So I'm interested in your answer there.
Yeah, I definitely think that translation piece requires a little bit of a step, right? Getting equipment, knowing where to ride, what's a safe route to take, whether you have a community to ride with, all of these things can be barriers to female participation in mountain biking. From my side, I think there's kind of two aspects to this. And on the one side, we have the growth of the professional aspect of the sport. And that's something that, as athletes, I think coverage, I think social media, I think the ability for female athletes to have a voice, to tell their own stories, and to use their experiences to hopefully inspire the next generation. All of those things will grow the opportunities that our professional female athletes have, and hopefully continue to provide these role models for the next generation. But I also feel that mountain biking is an incredible recreational sport, and that it has so much to give women beyond just a pathway to a competitive environment. And I actually started in 2023 a foundation, She Sense Foundation, that seeks to connect, support, and inspire women and girls through mountain biking. And those programs, we do a lot of grants to programs that get really young girls on bikes. And what I see in those programs is not that they necessarily all want to be professional female athletes and that's the right pathway. It's that they gain confidence, they gain community, they connect with mentors, and they see themselves as being able to take these risks and to kind of stretch their capacity in a way that I think is so powerful and needed, not just within the sport, of course, to progress, but in life. And what we're seeing in women's sports, but also I would say more broadly in society, is that women are being unconstrained in terms of what's possible. There are more opportunities, there are more possibilities, but they still require that you show up with confidence and you take that risk and you go for it. And I feel that mountain biking is an incredible sport to start giving young girls the opportunity to see themselves in that role, to see themselves as these strong, confident, capable individuals who can then take advantage of those opportunities and go after those big opportunities in life.
Who are some of the athletes, the women athletes, or just athletes in general, who have kind of inspired you? It doesn't have to necessarily be in your sport, but just across the board.
As a young athlete, I would say, in particular, Lindsey Vonn was really inspiring to me. And part of the reason was that I followed her on social media. And she was one of the first women that I followed that I saw lifting heavy in the gym and owning it, and really like seeking not just to be like a participant in this sport, but really going after these wins and having the success on a playing field that was, again, in downhill ski racing, primarily male dominated. And I just found that really badass and inspiring. And to
Super
me,
badass, for sure.
yeah, it really showed that, okay, that's a way that you can be in the world. And I think while I applied that to a different sport, it was incredibly inspiring to me as a young girl.
Well, obviously you have so much to go in your career, but when I think about all that you've done and what you are going to accomplish in the future as well, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want people to, when they look back at your career, what do you want them to think first when they think about you and what you've done?
Yeah, I would say in terms of like who I was as an athlete and a racer, I want to be remembered as someone who went for it. And that involves, in my career, definitely some of those moments where going for it paid off and there were some of those wins, but also who was open and honest and vulnerable and shared the challenging parts and the long periods of time in which going for it looked like failure and felt like failure. And I really hope, I believe when she retired, Abby Wambach had that famous speech where she said, I hope you forget me. Like, I hope that the next generation rises and has success, and that, you forget me in the sport in a way. And to me, I feel that's almost my hope in mountain biking, is that we have a really, really powerful generation of women who kind of take the baton that I took from the women before me and run as far as they can with it.
Well, I can say that we won't forget you. And I think that the generations of women won't either. I think it's important for each generation to not only carve their own path and kind of break down the walls and the barriers that still exist, but to also honor the generation that kind of made it a little bit easier for them. And my hope is that the women in your sport continue to do that as each generation passes. But we thank you so much for joining us. I feel like this was such an amazing conversation. We learned so much. And we just wish you the best of luck, and we wish you health and success in all that you do.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you.